Great, welcome to our panel on freelance writing. My name's John Clayton. I'll be the moderator of our panel today. Our starting point is the historical perception that freelance writer is a viable middle-class career option. Is it still? Was it ever? If so, how do you succeed in this changing world? We have a very interesting, diverse panel of people here to discuss this. They all have great full biographies on the website, but let me just introduce them briefly. Directly next to me is Andrea Thompson, co-author of I Am Because You Are. She's a Missoula native, started her career at The Independent, later worked as an editor at The New Yorker, and is now freelancing from Central Connecticut. Next to Andrea is Chris Latreille, Missoula-based freelance writer, the person who conceived of this panel. You've probably seen some of his work in The Independent and elsewhere. Next to Chris is Sarah Hepola. Sarah's the author of Blackout, a memoir that has just come out and received great reviews. Sarah also is an editor at Salon.com. Next to Sarah is Stephanie Land, another Missoula-based freelance writer. And at the far end is Skylar Browning, the editor of the Missoula Independent, as well as the author of Montana Baseball History, a fascinating new historical book. And I've asked each of our panelists to sort of help introduce themselves by answering three questions, just briefly. How long have you been freelancing? In how many of those years has freelancing paid all of your bills? And what was your most lucrative assignment ever? And so, Andrea, since you're sitting next to me, you get to start.
All right. So I've been freelancing for about 15 years, and it's never been my full-time career. It's always been a part-time thing I do on the side with a full-time job, or right now I'm taking care of my two children and freelancing part-time when they sleep. My biggest project to date has been I Am Because You Are, which is a book about a nonprofit in South Africa. And I worked on it on and off for about 5 years, and it was a great thing to work on.
I'm trying to think. I think I've been freelancing for, I don't know, Skylar, 8 years maybe since we've been working together. Yeah. It's never been anywhere close to my sole income. You know, it's pretty much paid for the records that I was reviewing for The Independent, or the beer that I was drinking while cramming to get the piece together Sunday night for Monday morning. As far as lucrative, I think, you know, financially, you know, when I started doing the freelance stuff and you know, a record review would pay, you know, a few dollars, $15, $20. And then I decided, well, I'm going to write fiction now. I'm going to take a break from nonfiction. I'm going to make some big bucks. And I never made anything writing short stories, even though I was publishing them in, you know, collections and stuff. So I went back to the freelance. So it's never been lucrative financially, but I think the experiences and the connections I've made with people through communicating with them, you know, for a piece or chasing a story, that's kind of probably been the most lucrative thing. It's just the cool people that you have an opportunity to interact with and create a relationship of some kind with.
I supported myself for 3 years in New York City as a freelancer, and support is like very loose definition of that term. I went into terrible debt during that time. Actually, it was about $50,000 of debt that I ended up with just for those 3 years. But you know, don't move to the most expensive city in the country and then decide to launch your full-time freelance career. Like, let me just give you that takeaway. During that time, I really had to hustle. And you know, what's funny is that some of the most lucrative things I got were just not at all, like things that sounded really cool, like I wrote for this great magazine, was never a lucrative thing. It was always these really random things, like from in-flight magazines, which at the time paid really well. And one of the coolest assignments I ever had was from Louis Vuitton advertising. It was the most random thing. And this is the thing about freelance, the freelance life, is that you go into it thinking that you're gonna write these really fascinating, pieces about culture, and you do get to do all these cool things, but then the stuff that pays will be like, Louis Vuitton had this advertising campaign and they needed somebody to interview the people. So I interviewed Mikhail Gorbachev in Berlin, which is an amazing assignment, about luggage. I was only allowed to ask him questions about Moscow and about his luggage. And I remember I sent the questions in to his translator, and his translator was like, you can ask him about luggage, but he hasn't packed his own luggage in 20 years. So I don't know what he's gonna say. But that was an advertising campaign that hired me because they had tons of money. Annie Leibovitz was doing the photo shoot. And some friend was like, well, Sarah interviews celebrities. So I did that. And it was there's no record of it, and it's just this most random thing. But those are the kind of assignments that will keep you afloat when you have a freelance life. It's just this, bizarre stuff. Those were the two questions. What was the other question?
Did you support yourself? So yeah.
Oh yeah, okay, all right.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, hold on, let me get this. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know how to do this.
My name's Stephanie Land, and I've really only been freelancing for a couple of months. I've been a writer since I was 10, but I've just now figured out how to make money at it, or figured out how it happens that people will actually pay me for my writing. I had a piece come out on Vox.com a few months ago that was really popular, and they paid me a lot of money for it. And then I found some Facebook groups full of people who were willing to share editors' emails, and there's no transparency with how much you're getting paid, and it's a really good group of people to help this freelancing career get started. And since I've been a part of that, I work constantly with 2 kids on my own, pitching as much as I possibly can, and get published that way. And I don't know if I'm paying all of my bills yet. I'm getting there. So, but it's a constant work schedule. I work every single chance I get. So, if that's how to be lucrative at it, then maybe that's what we need to do.
I guess technically my first freelance assignment was as a high school freshman doing a sports story for the local community newspaper. This was back east. And then I haven't really stopped doing freelance stuff since then, even though I have a full-time job now and just did a book project. Like Sarah, my most lucrative freelance project was not core at all. It was for a corporate client writing about student housing projects. I wish Mikhail Gorbachev was involved, luggage even. So with all the time that I've done freelance, I tried for 2 years to support myself and my family by doing it solo and leaving my full-time job. Kind of worked, but I'm pretty sure I racked up some debt too. And that was when I was writing about student housing projects. And so I went back to editing full-time after that. So yeah, the glamour thing, the one thing I would add about that is that I was able to pursue some of the projects that I couldn't have pursued otherwise, but then I had to do the stuff that would pay in order to do the glamour project. So I think for me personally, it's been better to find out how to pursue the stuff that I want to pursue with the full-time job. rather than the other way, if that makes sense.
Great.
Yeah.
Let's keep the mic and just talk however we want. Any keys to success? What do you really need to do to succeed, especially some of you who've been doing it for a longer time?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what Skylar said is so true. Like, you have to take like so much, the freelance writers that I know that do make a living out of it, they do things like trade publications. You know, I did a job for MTV Video Games. I don't even play video games. I remember once there was I had to write something about Duck Hunt, and I was like, "What's Duck Hunt, y'all?" And they were like, "Oh my God, you really don't know this." It was just like asking who's Michael Jackson or something at a pop music place. But you know, so you have to really be versatile. You have to, and I think you have to say yes to so many things. I mean, freelance writing is an incredible hustle. And then I think what Stephanie said about knowing who to contact is incredibly valuable too. When I was freelancing, part of like half the pain of it was trying to figure out who's the person at this magazine that you can talk to, and then you know, having that kind of community is incredibly valuable. One thing I always tell people that are starting out in freelance is do not write the editor-in-chief, do not write the senior editors. You always want, like, your instinct is to go to the power players. But those are the people that are the busiest, that get the most amount of mail. Go to the junior editors, the deputy editors. You can develop relationships with them by pitching with them. They like being treated like they're powerful. They like feeling like they have somebody that they can cultivate, and they will take pity on you because they were once in your position too. Whereas the senior editor is far more inclined to just completely ignore your email. So, you know, I think shooting low in that sense. You know, and then I think there's probably a very interesting conversation to be had about whether or not to work for free, which I'd always love to hear from people on that, because I think that's a really tough dilemma. But does anybody else have tricks?
I don't know if I have a trick so much as you also need to learn to manage your rage as a freelance writer. Because like there's magazines that I've submitted stuff for that have actively solicited, we want submissions, here's the address to send to, this is what we want to do, and you know, you can send a proposal that maybe you're wrong. I'm pretty sure I'm never wrong, so I know that wasn't my problem. And you submit to these guys and you wait and wait and wait, and they never get back to you, which, you know, I'm cool with, you know, if it's like an unsolicited submission. I mean, because editors just, you know, just get buried with people, because there's probably 10,000 rooms just like this one right now of people who want to do this stuff, you know, and want to be a freelance writer, and they want to see their byline in these cool magazines and stuff. But I get really frustrated if someone is saying, hey, writers, contact me, and then you never hear back from them. And I'd be curious to hear from the editors, because I'm sure there's a reason a lot of times that happens, just because of the bulk. But you know, there's magazines that I really loved that I don't read anymore, just because, you know, they'll know what they did. Yeah. I'm going to show them, you know. So yeah, you have to be willing to face that kind of rejection too, of just not even existing to these people, as well as you have to be, you know, able to handle people saying, no, I'm not interested, and be able to, you know, adapt to that and just not let that totally beat you down, and just keep going. You know, I did a Tell Us Something thing last night, and I mentioned this comment that my wife had relayed to me that she read somewhere, and she said, if the line says, if you're not hearing no very often, that means you're not asking for enough stuff. And I saw another writer friend of mine, Benjamin Percy, he writes in big magazines. He puts out these big novels. He's currently writing Green Arrow for DC Comics. He said, I get like one hot response to probably every 40 proposal I make across the board of all these different things I do. So you have to be willing to get knocked down and get back up again, and never let them see you rage, I guess.
One of the things we're blessed with on this panel is several editors who have actually worked with a lot of freelancers. Maybe we can put some numbers on this and show what they're facing. So I think Andrea and Sarah and Skylar have all worked with freelancers. Can you tell us how that looks from the editorial side, and maybe give us some numbers of how many queries you get and that sort of thing?
Well, the interesting thing for me is that when working at the New Yorker, I actually didn't get a huge number of pitches from people, probably because it is a place where people know there's a lot of staff writers, there is a high bar, and so you're not going to get quite as many queries coming in. But I probably fielded several dozen pitches over my 12 years or so working there, and none of them became pieces. And it is because the New Yorker has a lot of staff writers. And in terms of not getting a response, as Chris mentioned, sometimes it is the bulk. You get a ton of emails every day. It's not always pitches, but it's stuff that's happening, and things get buried. And if it's not a name you know, it's going to get bumped down on the to-do list. And then as a junior editor, you are going to get a more receptive audience, as Sarah said, because junior editors are looking for people to cultivate. They're looking to make a splash of their own by bringing in a great writer. But the drawback is that those junior editors still have to work through the senior editor hierarchy, and that takes some time. So that can lead to a little bit of a backlog. And so it can take a long time to get back to people. And I always felt very guilty. I always felt terrible that I was saying no to so many people, many of whom I thought were talented writers and had good ideas, but there just wasn't space in the magazine. So it's a tough thing to break into a big magazine like that.
Yeah, I've worked on both sides of, I was a freelance writer for years, and then I came to work at Salon, and I think it's one of those things that's really valuable to do both sides, to have empathy for both sides. You feel so mad and you feel so angry on both sides. It's kind of like being a server or being a customer, and both sides are like, what the hell? Why do they do that? And then you do the other side, you realize why it happens. What would happen for me is at Salon, I got a ton of I was doing the personal essays section, and so I would get about 100 submissions a week. I was supposed to read about 100 of those submissions a week, in addition to doing anything else I had to do for the magazine and in my own life. The way it would work is I would sit down and I would read them in one stretch on a Thursday, and if I didn't get to the end of them, I would just be like, well, I'm going to do that later. I always intended to do it. I had the best of intentions. But what happens is that another 100 come in the next week. The chances of my getting to those ones that I missed are very small. And so, this is what happens is you get ghosted, essentially. Well, first of all, that's unsolicited, right? I didn't get a chance to read them, and I never got back to them, and I feel guilty about it. But over the years, the guilt wears away, and you're kind of like, I don't care anymore. It's just part of the game. The part that I really do feel guilty about, and I will carry this for a while, is I would reach out to writers and be like, hey, you should write something for me. And then they would send something in, and I just never get back to them. And it's not, that's terrible.
That was me.
Yeah, that was and that's why I'm bringing this up, because I feel like I can do some kind of atonement for you. You can maybe, I can unload a little bit of my guilt. This is one of the worst sins I had as an editor, was that I would actively reach out to someone. They would respond with a story. They had done work, and then I just wouldn't respond to them. It is awful. And I don't have I heard this story once about this guy that couldn't pay his bills, and he kept all his bills in a sack for a year. And he was like, I'm gonna go through those one day. And I feel like that's what it was for me. I'm gonna go through those one day. But then you never do. You end up just throwing the sack away. And it's terrible. It's an outgrowth of how, basically the industry, where at my publication, we went through, at Salon, we had 2 layoffs. We lost nearly half the staff. Everybody was shouldering more work than they could handle. And in some ways, it's just one of the cruelties of the profession. Like, the truth is that no one is entitled to a writing life. It's the ugly truth. And, you know, you have to deal with the realities of it. And part of it is that people like me, who are well-intentioned editors, do not have, there's too many mouths to feed. And we fail people. And I failed people. And the good news is that I also helped a lot of people along in their career. And the people that I was publishing, you know, and could pull into that conversation, I'm very grateful and proud of that. But it just, like, the numbers don't shake out. And so, you know, you ghost people. And I was, one of the great reliefs of my life was discovering how common that was. Like, that's a bad thing to share, but I should just say it in this room. But I've had so many freelance writers tell me, like, oh my gosh, these editors just won't get back to me. Like, even pieces that, like, an editor was like, yeah, I'd like to run that. And then they can never hear from them again. And it's like, what happened? And the freelance person is just going, it's crazy making. Because you're alone in your house and you don't have anybody to talk to. And the editor is just, meanwhile, just, you know, I have a line in my book where I say, like, an editing life is like being pelted to death with pebbles. I mean, you're just getting stuff all the time. So those are my thoughts.
Yes. The one thing that I agree with everything that's been said so far. The indie gets a ton of unsolicited pitches, some written, some in pitch form, and I try to at least acknowledge that I've received it, and I fail. And it's unintentional, and it's a matter of time. The one thing I want to add to this, though, like, if you're a freelancer and if you're sending pitches, the one thing that rubs me the wrong way as a receiver of pitches is if you have absolutely no understanding of who you're pitching. That's the one thing that's going to move you to the bottom of a long list. And I'm always surprised in a relatively small town like Missoula how many people don't understand what the Missoula Independent is. And that's not from a, like, because we're awesome and you should know perspective, but if you're taking the time to pitch me a story, you should know, like, what we are, like, that we're a weekly paper at a minimum. So that's just the one thing I wanted to add. Like, yes, we do have trouble responding to everybody. Yes, follow-up communication can be a challenge, unfortunately. The indie runs a lot of freelance writers, though, and we have good relationships over the years with freelance writers, and that's with, I gotta imagine, one of the smaller budgets available for freelance writers. But we try, and, like, all editors try, but the one thing that just pisses me off more than anything is when you don't know who you're pitching. So that's my big note, just to add to this round.
As Sarah mentioned earlier, one outgrowth of that is, well, maybe we should be writing for free. How many of you have written for some publication for free, and was it worthwhile? Anyone can start.
None of us wants to admit it.
Oh, I'd be happy to admit it.
No, I can't.
Oh, okay. Do you want to talk?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I wrote for free. I very happily. You know, I was writing my. This was like 2001, so there wasn't so much controversy around it. It was actually the first. Like, I had been writing a blog, which obviously was free, and I was contacted by a website called The Morning News. TheMorningNews.org is a really lovely literary-minded site of just these really cool people that were putting together this site of stories that were interesting and smart and kind of like a DIY New Yorker kind of deal. And they didn't pay. And I was like, well, that's okay. I think that I just want to write these stories anyway, because I didn't have a sense that there was a marketplace for them. So I started writing stories for this site. And it was one of these sites that a lot of the taste-making people were reading at the time. And so my story got the attention of an editor at the New York Times who had just been hired. Her name was Jodi Cantor. She was hired to revamp the arts and leisure section. And she saw my stories and she emailed me and she said, "Would you like to write for the New York Times?" And I was like, "You've got to be kidding me." It was the most amazing thing, probably like one of the most amazing things that's ever happened in my life. And the thing is that there is a total risk reward for writing for free. But one of the great rewards of it is that your story is out there. And I don't have a lot of tolerance for people that are like, "I write, but my stuff's nowhere." You know, it's like, I'm sorry, there's too many channels for you to be writing and have your, even if it's just your own website. You know, people need to be able to see and hear your voice. No one's gonna go to the business of like figuring you out and unlocking your talent. You know, like you need to put your talent out in the world and you need to be writing. Since then, you know, 2001 is a very different time than 2015 in terms of the marketplace. And there's so many, I've definitely heard from people I really respect say, do not write for free. Because there are too many places out there like that will take advantage of you, and they'll tell you that it's just, you know, it's good for your brand or whatever. You know, we don't have to pay you. But then at the same time, most of the online places pay $100, $200. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to this.
Well, since you have the mic, can I ask you a question related to that as an editor?
Yeah.
If you get a pitch from someone that you don't know and you're looking at their byline, they've written for here, here, and here, and most of those are free outlets that you know that don't pay, do you think, well, that's really not legitimate? Because there's no editorial there, anybody can post there, so as far as I'm concerned, these guys have never written for anybody. Or do you even look at that?
No, I mean, I kind of do look, but I mean, like, there's different places. Like for instance, the Huffington Post doesn't pay, and so, like, for me, in a bio, that means nothing. If you've written for the Huffington Post, that's like telling me you have a blog. But no, I'm sorry, it's true. But
I have a blog.
I know. No, nothing wrong with it, man.
I'm just.
I know, it's funny. But if you've written for the AWL, which doesn't pay, that's interesting to me. I think they do actually pay now. But like it depends on what the site is, you know? Because there are places that don't pay, but they're really good sites and they have really smart writing. And so, and by the way, it's not a mark against you if you've written for the Huffington Post in my book. It's the same way it's not a mark against you. I mean, you know, but most places I see, they're from those places that pay like $100 or $200, you know, whether it's, I'm blanking on the other places, you know, but you said you got to pay a lot for Vox.
Mm-hmm.
Would you mind telling us how much you got paid?
They have a flat rate of $500.
That's great. That's really great.
Mm-hmm.
That's what, by the way, that's what was like a standard fee on the internet when I first started. That's what like Slate and Salon and all those places were paying. And then it got like, then the Huffington Post came and they weren't paying any writers and the economy tanked. And I mean, we stripped our fees at Salon from $500 to $150. It was crazy.
How many words was your Vox piece? Just curious.
They aim for, I can't remember how many marks it was, but their aim is 1,500 to 2,000,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is pretty normal.
Yeah.
Normal I'd say is 750 to 1,200. So.
Does anyone else want to talk on the writing for free question? Yeah.
I got really excited when the Huffington Post noticed me. And it was at the very beginning. And I just republished things to them. I didn't create content for them. And I think a lot of people will get picked up by them and have one piece get featured on their Facebook page and get a lot of exposure from that. And then from there, you just build. And so you go to other sites who will republish, like say you've had a blog for years and you've written for free there. And so you just keep republishing, getting the exposure, getting the bylines, and working your way up. And so writing for free, like I placed a piece this week for free, but it's with the Manifestation site, and it's an amazing site. They have a huge following, and I feel blessed
to have like placed this piece for free. Whereas I had one go up on Hello Giggles today, and they pay $25, which, you know, was more of just like, okay, so I can say that I wrote on Zoe Deschanel's website, you know. And you pick and choose with your passion pieces. Like, if you're really passionate about something that's not necessarily a subject that people want to read about, who won't pay for it, you can still find your audience through, you know, a friend's blog that has a huge following, or sites that won't necessarily pay a lot of money for it. But as a writer, you're still writing to get your story out there. And from there, you can get noticed by other people, like what Sarah said. Or really, it builds your confidence too. Like, just knowing that 10,000 people clicked on or liked it on Facebook or whatever, that's, you know, that's something. I mean, wow, people are actually reading my stuff. And so you submit more, and then they start paying you, and it just starts snowballing after that. So I think writing for free does have some validity to it. I wouldn't suggest doing it, I don't know, habitually. I mean, go for the places that pay a lot, because they want your writing just as much. So, you know.
I'll say it's not exactly writing for free, but I do a lot of freelance editing, and oftentimes when I meet a client, they want me to do a portion of the editing to as sort of an audition, see how we work together, see if I would take it in a direction that they agree with, and that to me is fine. It's all part of auditioning to get a job. It's a small chunk of time. But I did once have someone give me a portion of a manuscript to take notes on as an addition, and I hadn't yet done the work, and she emailed me and said, I think I'm going to hire someone else, but could you please send me your notes anyway? And I did not do that. I think we'd had a really great meeting. We'd had a wonderful conversation, and I think she thought, we're friends, and so you'll do this for me. And she didn't understand that this is my business, and I'm not going to just give you my notes for free. So those are times when I do work for free, and I agree that writing for free is often a good avenue to get noticed. And it is a perfectly valid thing to show editors who will assign you paid work. I don't think there's any real stigma to free work if it's good work. So.
Early on, we were noting how it's the unusual gigs that actually prove the most lucrative. And a couple of our panelists have looked at some new forms of unusual gigs, and I wonder if we can dig a little bit more into them. I'm thinking, first, Andrea, of your book, which, as I understand it, your co-author started teaching in South Africa and then started a nonprofit to aid that, and so you were sort of tied to that nonprofit. And I wonder if you can talk about those relationships and how that worked for you as a writer.
Sure. So I got involved with the project through a literary agent who knew Jake, wanted him to write a book, knew he needed a writer, and put us together. And as I said earlier, we worked together on and off for 5 years, putting together the proposal, and then once it's sold, writing the book together. And you definitely have to put aside your sort of writerly ambitions, some of your own personal feelings when you're writing for someone else. It was very much Jake's book. He had a narrative that he wanted. He wanted to tell the story of the organization. He didn't want it to be all about him, so he didn't want it to be really focused on his memoir, even though he had kind of an interesting story. He's a very vivid personality. And he wanted to make sure he was reflecting the mission, the practical philosophies, and the accomplishments of his nonprofit, which is the Ubuntu Education Fund. He's got a lot of ideas about how development work should look in Africa and in other areas of the world, and so he wanted to get that across. And he, when we were selling the proposal, we met with a publisher who was very interested in the book but wanted it to be more of a journalistic piece about South Africa post-apartheid. And that was not at all what Jake wanted. It would have been a great book. It would have been a really interesting book to work on and to be involved with, but that's not what he wanted. And so I followed my client, and we did the book that he wanted to do. And you know, he understood that a book should not be a marketing material. It needs to have personal narrative. It needs to have a story. But he didn't want his story to damage his nonprofit in any way. So it was kind of a delicate balance to walk as a writer. But it is, to work that closely with one person and on a sustained project like that is a very different thing than writing a piece and submitting it to an editor. You don't have the final say on what goes in, so you have to be sort of egoless about your writing, but it's very rewarding, and that's the biggest thing that I've ghosted. But you know, I've done smaller things, and they can pay very well because you're working for people who want to get a message out but don't have the time or the willingness to write clearly, and so they're often willing to pay quite a bit to get someone to do that for them.
Have any of the rest of you done any ghostwriting? You want to share stories about that? The other sort of potentially new institution, it seems to me, is Stephanie, you've done some work for the Economic Hardship Reporting Project, which, as I understand it, is one of these sort of nonprofit middlemen between you and the final publication. There's been some talk about how this might be great for journalism to get more money into important issues. But I'm wondering how that works for freelancers. Has that been a good relationship for you, and how?
I think what's important about the Economic Hardship Reporting Project, it was started by Barbara, I can never say her last name, Ehrenreich. Thanks. She wrote Nickel and Dimed. And so on that plane, she's tried to get people who have lived in poverty or are low income and writers. She works with them and mentors them. There's another editor, Alyssa Court, and the two of them work with you on your piece to get the editing right and the story out, and then they place it in bigger publications. They pay you $1 a word, which is a lot more than someone starting out, especially from a low-income background or who lives that lifestyle, would have a hard time getting a piece placed in the New York Magazine or Pacific Standard or the higher places that they work with. So I think it's an amazing program for that. I mean, I can't speak for all freelancers, but for me, just to say that I'm working with them on this project and that they accepted my pitch and they're willing to place my piece and pay me. I mean, that's been incredible for me. Just
So wait, how does it work?
like from start to
Well, like, do you pitch them this idea? You had the idea, or?
yeah, I got the lady's email through the Facebook group. It's called Binders, if anyone's heard of it. It's kind of a don't ask, don't tell Facebook group. But
You should mention it's a women's only group too.
yeah, it's it was started about a year ago. A couple of women started a Facebook group called the Binders Full of Women Writers, based off of Romney's binders that he held up. And it grew so quickly. I think right now there's 34,000 women in the main binder. And then from those binders, they have spread off there's maybe 100 subgroups, and the one that I'm in, the freelancer, full-time freelancer binder, you get on there and you say, hey, I'm working on a story that is about, you know, the time I lost my wedding ring when I was on vacation. And do you, anybody know who might be interested in this? And other women will comment, hey, you know, Mary Claire might take that one. Here's her email. Or, you know, I got paid this much for this. You should, and we all kind of work to lift each other up and ask for more money and to stand up for ourselves, really. I'd say probably 70% of the things that I've placed have come from that group. And the jobs, or, you know, editors will go onto the site and say, I need pitches for this. Can you, is there anybody who knows about the eating culture in Los Angeles? Like, I need a story by Friday. And they'll get hundreds of stories just from that. So that's how I heard about the EHRP. Someone had posted a story that she wrote that went up in Jezebel. And so, and then Barbara just recently had a piece in The Guardian about how poverty, people who live in poverty often don't, they're not able to write about it because they either don't have the education or the ability to get their stories out there. And so the person who wrote for the Jezebel site, I sent her a Facebook message. I'm like, I need to write for this. Like, how do I do that? So she gave me the email of one of the editors, and I pitched her a story, and it was accepted. And then I think they gave me a month to write my piece. It came back so heavily edited that I cried. I think she kept maybe a paragraph of my piece. So I'm kind of dealing with that right now.
It happens to all of us.
So this is my first time that it's like
It's
really,
traumatic.
Yeah.
I've shed a lot of tears.
It was all red,
Yeah.
all red.
I've dealt with a lot of rage.
Yeah, rage, tears.
And so I'm trying really hard to say really good things about this in that place of being so heavily edited. Another thing that I just started doing that is similar to the AHRP is I just got accepted as a writing fellow for the Center for Community Change. And they've been doing a program for a couple of years now that's a lot like the EHRP, only they have a stipend that you get monthly. And so it's about $700 a month, and I'm expected to write 2 or 3 pieces. We meet once a week through video chat, which is like, I have coworkers now. And so, and I see people in person and we talk about our pieces, and so that's huge. But they're also training me for how to be a journalist, really, because my background is creative writing. So that has been amazing, and they work the same way. I don't know if they place pieces in like the New York Times or anything, but they work with you to write something, and then they place it in a higher publication that they have contacts with. So I feel that those programs are amazing because you, as someone who lives at the poverty line or under, you see all these articles about people trying to write about your life, and you know, to have the first person's perspective and to have it published along the same lines as The Atlantic, or where you know a lot of people will actually read it. That's, I think it's very important. So.
Great, thank you. At this point, I'd like to open the discussion up a little bit. I think we've gotten to learn a lot of interesting things about our panelists. Panelists, do you have any questions for each other? Or do we have questions from the audience?
So I missed your name, but you said that at one point you were working with another job while freelancing. So I imagine you don't have time to send out as many pitches as was kind of coming from the rest of the panel. So I was wondering about, you know, the need to be slightly more strategic and how you how you manage that.
Sure. I'm Skylar, by the way.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. What was your name?
Michael.
Michael. All right. Yeah. So, no unsolicited pitches at this point. If I come up with a story idea with someone who I've networked with in the past, and think that they're going to give me a better outlet than the outlet that I have at the Missoula Independent, whether it be national or in another region, then I'll target my pitches basically. I'll be more focused in how I target my pitches. Historically, though, for me, I have always had, with the exception of a 2-year span, a full-time job while freelancing. And typically for me, that full-time job would pay my bills, but I wanted to write my own stuff or stuff that I enjoyed doing. So for years, for me, back east, that was writing sports. So I would work 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 and then go straight to a stadium or an arena and file game stories or write sports stories. And I did that for years. And then that worked and got me a job writing sports full-time, which was awesome and short-lived. And then that stopped when I moved out to Missoula, because there are less sports here that you can get paid to write about. But now, working a full-time job and still freelancing, it's all about me just working the connections that I've developed over time. And this is something that we haven't really talked about on the panel, but like the effort that goes into marketing yourself and getting yourself out there is, for me personally, took up more time than the writing itself. And so when the 2-year span when I wasn't working full-time, it was only freelancing and being a dad, I felt like that's when I was sending out more unsolicited stuff and just trying to network the hell out of anything and everybody that I could find. That didn't pay off at the time as much as it's paying off now. You know, like I made connections that now might result in a story or, you know, a new outlet for me to write for. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I have a comment kind of based on what, probably don't even need the microphone.
You're good.
Kind of what he just said, you know, another thing, you know, part of the networking is really to see what else is going on. So if you have interests and things you want to write about, it's critical to read pieces that other people are doing, particularly in the magazines, like, you know, Skylar said, knowing the publication that you want to write for. You know, it's critical, and you know, networking isn't just about kind of throwing yourself out there. It's kind of following the channels of the things that you're interested in and knowing maybe who's who and kind of what's going on. I mean, and a perfect example of that is I heard about this book that a guy named Michael Dax wrote about grizzly bears, that I want to read this. So I contacted Skylar's arts editor, Erica, and said, if you guys get this book, I want it. She gave it to me to review at some point. So I recognized Michael when he walked in the door, yet he doesn't know the guy who's ultimately going to sign off on it. You know, that's nothing to, I'm not holding that against you. I just thought that was just this weird alignment of planets where, you know, this is the guy who's going to have the final say on what I'm going to write about your book. And, you know, it's just, I think it's important to know your environment and who's who and what's going on, and you know, that's kind of one of the things I like about freelancing is it gives me an excuse to read a lot of stuff that maybe, you know, it's a job. You know, I can be on the couch, I'm working, you know, and sometimes that's literal. If it's a book review, oh, sorry, I can't mow the lawn, I have this book review that's due, you know, so yeah, it's know your environment.
I heard Michael asking about strategy, and I wonder, Skylar, if you can tell us about your decision to write your baseball book, which is far more fascinating than I would have expected. Skylar's reading on Thursday was fantastic, and I was like, wow, this is great. I wish I would have written this book. Why did you decide to?
I had no idea. That was just an unusual confluence of circumstances that allowed me to do a bigger project like that with everything else that was going on. So I don't know that it's going to be instructive for everybody, just to be honest. But like, for me, you know, because it was baseball and because I just mentioned I have a sports background, I don't get to write sports anymore. So it scratched an itch that I don't get to do very often. You know, I didn't do it for free, but I knew I wasn't going to make a lot of money off of it necessarily. But it was an opportunity to do something I love, do something that's different. And it was a hell of a lot of work, but I also went into it with a researcher who was going to be able to do a lot of the legwork. And that was huge. That allowed me to fit it into my schedule. So those are the things that made it possible. I think everyone in this room, you know, you're given opportunities or presented opportunities, if you're lucky, to do something that you really want to do. And then you have to weigh like, well, are they paying me? And are they paying me enough? And all these other things that go into your decision-making process. For me, there were a lot of reasons I could say no to this, to the book project. The first being that there's no way I had time. But there were enough reasons that lined up just perfectly to say yes, where it was worth it for me to kind of punish myself for a while, but have fun doing it. And I will use that as an opportunity to say one thing, which is that like the hustle of writing and freelance writing, like there's some pretty real and depressing information that can be, you know, passed around in a panel like this about what it takes to be successful and to make money and to pay your bills and to get published. But at the same time, like for me, I just love to write. You know, I just want to write. And hopefully if I'm writing good stuff, then other people want to read it. And the writing doesn't feel like work for me. So if the worst thing that happens, for instance, making a decision like this, is I have to write later into the night or early morning after writing or editing other people's writing all day, like that's okay with me. If the project is worth it, that's okay with me. If the writing feels like work, then it's a harder decision.
Sarah, how about your decision to write your book?
I mean, I think like Skylar's, it's sort of, you know, it's just this weird personal thing. I mean, I had quit drinking, and I thought that my whole writing life was over because so much of my creativity was tied up with drinking, beer, alcohol, you know, and so I think I was really desperate to prove to myself that I could do something in sobriety that I hadn't done in all my drinking years. Because all my drinking years, I was the person at the bar that was like, gonna write a book. I'm gonna write a book, you guys. One day I'm gonna write this book. I loved it when my friends would introduce me as like their friend that was gonna write a book one day, because it felt like I had written a book when they said that. You know, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna write a book. And then what I was doing in my spare time was I was watching like reality marathons on VH1 because I was so hungover, you know, like, and I was like, I think instead of writing today, I'm gonna watch the entire season of Flavor of Love. And you know, yeah, it was just pain reduction, you know, it was just pain management, you know, and you know what Skylar said is true, writers write. That's the bottom line. The successful writers that I know are successful because they would write, whether they were writing for free or writing for $1,000 or $5,000, they would just be writing. And eventually you figure it out. You figure out how to swim in the stream where you get a career out of it. You know, I hope you don't mind, Stephanie, that when I heard you talking to somebody as I was walking in, and you were saying, well, it's so cool, I actually just learned how to get paid from writing. You know, like, you're figuring it out, and I see all the light bulbs going off, and it's really awesome. You're making a career out of this, but you were doing it already. You were gonna do it regardless. And I think, you know, but you asked me the strategies, why to write a book. I mean, you write a book because you want to find the limits of your talent. And you want to figure out what you're capable of doing. And I've been writing 1,500 to 2,000 word personal essays for many, many years. And I've gotten really good at it. And there was part of me that wanted to stay in that safe place because I was getting rewarded for it. People liked it. It was liked on Facebook, and I felt validated. And it was just like, it was good, you know. But I wanted to find out what else I could do. And then the huge sucky thing about it was that for me, writing that book took like 3 years. And I was not at all prepared for how long it was going to take me. And I was doing my job at Salon on the side. And it was slower, it was harder than anything I ever expected. And then for me, the rewards of writing a book were immense. I was really, like, it's been very, very good for me. I mean, it just also is good to challenge yourself. I think it's good when you get, once you do figure out how to swim in that stream, then it's actually a really good idea to be like, what about the bigger waters? And like you keep going, and you keep pushing yourself and you see what you can do. You were talking about ghostwriting. I would love to ghostwrite with somebody. I think that's fascinating, the idea of helping somebody else tell their story. And there's so many different ways to make a living as a writer. We all have one idea. It's like writing a fiction book and becoming famous like Hemingway. And that is like the least, it's almost inevitable that none of us in this room will have that career. So you have to diversify and you find the million other ways that you can be a writer and make writing a part of your life.
Great. It is 10:30. I know there are other events starting now. If anyone needs to run away, we won't be terribly offended. But I'm enjoying this conversation. Let's keep it going for another 15 or 20 minutes. Do we have other questions? Yes, in the purple.
How important is a website to have when you're pitching a story? And if an editor is interested in your story, will you read somebody's website or not really? If you have a body of work that you can present.
I'll say that from my experience, it's very useful as an editor if you have a pitch come in, you don't really know the writer. It's extremely useful to be able to just go to their website and immediately be able to look at what they've done, get a sense of who they are, what they're capable of. It's just sort of a one-stop shop, because if I have to Google someone's name and then sort through all of the false hits and figure out, is this really the right person or is this someone else with the same name, chances are I'm never going to respond to your email. So it's very useful.
And as a writer, who, if I'm assigned a story related to you, it's incredibly useful as well. So, if I'm going to interview you and I don't know anything about you, it's a lot easier to Google and find your website, or better yet, have it be part of what you submitted to the editor who assigns the piece to me, so that I can get it all, so I kind of know who you are, so that I can try and come up with interesting questions to ask you, and I think worse than not having a website, though, is to have a website that I go to and the last post was like 2002. And then it's like, well,
Sure.
Who is this person now 13 years later? So, kind of both sides of the stream. I think it's important.
I think that you all need to, if you haven't done this already, Google yourselves and see what the first things that come up are, and remember that editors are doing that. If you don't have a website that you supply, people are going to Google you, and then what's there? And is that what you want your public face to be? And if that's not what you want your public face to be, think about changing it.
My website's been really useful just because when you first start out with freelancing, you send them a pitch and then you send them clips of other places where you've been published. And if you don't have that, then you might have some blogs that you've written that you're very proud of and you think are very good. And so you can send them at least something so that they know your voice a little bit, and so they know who you are, like what Andrea said. So I update my website all the time just to keep it current and to keep it so people know where I am at right now and what I'm doing, what my interests are, what I'm passionate about, where I've been published. So yeah, I think it's really important.
Yeah, do it.
Other questions? Yes. Yeah, no.
I have a question. I'm a medical health writer, and I'm wondering if having a niche market like that can increase your chances of success freelancing, or is it better to be sort of broad spectrum?
I've never heard that narrowing the things that you write about would help you, would be better for you, but it also increases your chance of having more targeted relationships with publications. If that's what you want to write about and that's all you want to write about, then work with your limitations. you know, then you start to develop relationships with those magazines, and you don't have so many different like I don't know, like lines of string to follow. You know, you can use it to your advantage. But I would always I would also suggest to you that you might want to diversify, you know, and think about other things that you might want to write. I just think having more things to write about is always better.
Yeah, I think if there's a niche that you're interested in, certainly work that niche hard. But, you know, I had a person ask me this weekend, you know, what's your thing? What do you write about? And I said, you know, at this point in where I am, I don't have the luxury of being able to focus on one thing. I mean, there are certainly things I like to write about more than others, but right now I told Andrea earlier, I'm kind of in case of emergency break glass period of my career where I want Skylar, if they need a story, to know that, well, let's get Latre to do it, because he'll do anything, you know? It's like, you know, let's get Mikey, you know, the old commercial, because that's part, you never know when one of those weird pieces that you may have never thought about pitching becomes the one that somebody sees that leads to something bigger. So for me, it's you know, the more I can write, I'm writing, and I don't really care what it's about.
Yeah, and I think always remember that as a journalist, that your opportunity is to learn. I mean, you know, you're not supposed to necessarily come in as an expert on a lot of these things. You know, you're there to learn, ask questions, be curious, be a professional learner. Sorry, did you want to say?
I was just going to say, look for a crossover story. Like if you're in the medical and health, if that's your niche right now, look for something that might branch out of that, but it has an element of it, so that you can use your experience to your advantage in pitching whoever's outside of what you're doing right now. That could be personality profile from the medical health field. It can be, you know, a tech story, but gets, you know, from a tech story from the medical field, but that gets you into a different stream, to use another analogy.
So I know I'm supposed to be the moderator and just keep the discussion going, but I've got an opinion, and I want to disagree. I think being a medical writer is a skill that not everybody has, and I think you should go ahead and pursue that, because that has a better chance of providing you with enough income to pay your bills as a freelancer. And so yes, certainly for your personal growth, expand and look at different markets, but my niche is business strategy, and I make a pretty good living ghostwriting business strategy articles. It's really boring, but it's really specialized. It's something that apparently not everybody can do. And so I would encourage you to exploit your niche as loud as possible.
Yeah, I can add to that. Just on the freelancer.com sites, you see companies, they need content for their website. Everybody needs content. They need well-written content. There's a lot of medical websites out there who need a well-written article about something. And I know nothing about that, but you do. And so that's where, you know, the niche comes in, where you can go to that website and say, I have all this experience in the medical field, here's some clips, you know, and they have just as much money as everybody else, and they can pay you. So that could be your regular freelancing job, and then you can spend time on your passion pieces too. So, and that's where you can branch out and be creative. But as a freelancer, you kind of need 2 or 3 jobs that you can chew on constantly to keep you afloat while you're working on the bigger paying jobs. So,
are there any sites in particular you'd recommend for medical health writing?
Again, I know nothing about medical. There's Brian Scott's Morning Coffee. You can get onto that. He sends you an email every morning of jobs, and they're all across the country. They're telecommuting. They're in a specific city. They're all over the place. I can't remember what website that's through, but I'm sure if you Google it, you can find it. And just there's the freelancers, Elance, I think is another one, and just other sites. Stay away from the ones that pay you 3 cents a word or $5 for 1,000 words. you will get paid more. So you just have to keep faith.
I would also encourage you to look at organizations that are involved, nonprofits in the medical field, medical device manufacturers. There are many organizations that need writing. It's not just magazines. A comment over here.
I just want to say my husband has been supporting us as a freelancer for the last 15 years. One of his tracks is medical and insurance companies. Also, major publications or major online outlets like WebMD are constantly looking for people who will refresh stuff. So, there is a lot of that work to be done. And depending on your background, whether you're coming out of being a professional in medical development, then also look at things like your professional organizations that you may have already formed connections with, because they can be a benefit to you as well. But I think there's a ton, oh God, Google any disease in the world and find out how many hits there are. Somebody's writing all that content. Some of it is crap.
This is the problem with every job, is that I see it and it's crap and I want to.
You can do a better job, and you have to go in with that and with a confidence in your authority. And I think that's going to carry you. Also branch out when you feel like it.
Thank you. Thanks for all.
Wonderful. Other questions? Discussion topics? Yeah.
I guess I have more of a practical question, but I have a full-time job as well and trying to freelance, right? And I'm just wondering, for those of you that have had freelance or full-time jobs, how do you find the time to write and cook dinner and take care of the kids? And I mean, does anybody have any time management strategies that have paid off or seem to work?
I work at night actually the 15-month-old is asleep in my lap in a boppy while I'm hunched over and nursing her and type until 2 in the morning. I do it during the day for 20-minute stints while she's actually interested in Sesame Street. You just find time when you can. If it's important to you, you'll find time. I lost a lot of sleep, but it's there. It's on. I've written it, so.
I hear from a lot of mothers that they wake up super early, like 4 to 6 in the morning, like that right before the kids wake up, and that seems to work for them. That's brutal. I mean, it's brutal. But there's also something really beautiful about writing that early in the morning when your brain's sharp and the world's quiet and nobody's emailing you and nobody's on Twitter, like something very, very cool about that time.
Nighttime is the only time that I could write, and still today can write. My biggest problem was always finding time to do the interviews. Like when I was home, I was a stay-at-home dad, and so when am I going to schedule an interview with someone? And I hate to say it, but television. Like I would have to turn on the TV and do the interview in the backyard on my phone while the kid is watching TV for a half an hour while I'm doing the interview. Like you just got to. The interviews were the hardest thing for me. Finding time to write, you do that at night. But like getting my interviews in with my sources was what the challenge was. And I would employ whatever trick I could come up with during the workday. So.
I'd agree with the early morning and also nighttime. Nap times are good. When I had a full-time job, I was lucky enough to have a job with a little bit of flexibility, so I would take a lunch break and do interviews or duck out a little bit early so that I could go sit down somewhere and meet with someone or write a few hundred words. But it is a difficult thing to find that time, but you just have to, I think also being able to work in short bursts is very valuable. I know a lot of people who say, I need to have a stretch of 4 hours so I can really settle in and get my mind clear and think about it. You don't have 4 hours.
Yeah, 4 hours is great, but I've heard George Saunders tells a story about writing his book on the subway. On the subway commute in the mornings in New York. You gotta learn to write on the moving train.
I've written on my phone on the plane before. Just that's when the time was available. I mean, there's lots of people who are working 2 jobs, and that's a tough thing to have to work 2 jobs, but when you decide that you want to do something different, and the only way you can do it is to do it simultaneous with something that you're already doing, you're already taking on something that's going to be really, really hard to pull off. And you just hope that you can create whatever time management you have to be able to pull it off, which is why not everybody does it. Because there is that period, unless you're lucky, where you can't just do the one thing that you want to be doing. So there's no easy way to do it. I mean, my thing is I hear a lot of people saying, oh, I don't have time, yet they can go on and on and on about how they binge watched Game of Thrones or whatever the last episode of whatever this TV show. I mean, I haven't regularly watched TV in 10 years. And a big part of that was because it was just too easy to sit down and just, like you were talking about earlier, you have all this intention in the world to dedicate yourself and get this piece of writing done. You end up, 4 hours later with Cheeto stains and all that stuff. So yeah.
I've also found it's really useful to always have a notebook handy, and a lot of my pieces come from that, where I'll get an idea, I'll see something, I'll hear somebody say something snarky, and it'll spur a thought, and so I'll write down an outline for an article, and then I'll think about it all day, and then that night I can write out 750 words really quick because I've already put a lot of mind space into it. So that's what's been working for me, just to always be jotting. I have a stack of notes on my desk just from things I can barely make sense of. So.
This panel was originally Chris's idea, and I'd love to give you the last word. Do you have other questions or thoughts that you want to share or have asked, have answered?
Just be careful when you tell someone that you'd like to see something, because chances are they're going to say, great, do it. I intended to be out there. When I suggested, because they very craftily said, if you have ideas, submit them. So, but I'm glad I did. I feel like I was out there. I've learned a lot from my
I think it's been a
companions, peers.
co-panelists. Yes. I think it's been a great discussion. Thank you all for participating. Thank you for coming. Keep in mind that the bookstore out in the middle has books by Andrea and Sarah and Skylar. Go check out those books. I believe they'll be available to sign them if you'd like. But
I have one out there too.
Oh, I'm sorry, and Chris has one out there too. Thanks very much for coming.